Imagine boarding a flight, expecting nothing more than a smooth journey to your destination, only to face assumptions and judgment at every step. This is the story of Dr. James Reid, a renowned surgeon whose expertise would soon save a life mid-flight, but not before he endured an unsettling encounter with prejudice. In today's story, we'll witness a scandalous chain of events that starts at the departure gate and unfolds in the skies, exposing the everyday biases that many face and delivering an unexpected twist that left everyone speechless. Before we dive into this compelling story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell notifications so you never miss another eye-opening tale that challenges perspectives and inspires change. Let's get started. The air at Gate C-12 was a mix of muted anticipation and impatience, like any other busy terminal. Boarding announcements blared intermittently, children clutched their stuffed animals, and business travelers juggled phones and briefcases. The fluorescent lighting added a cold, impersonal glow to the scene. Amy had been a flight attendant for over a decade. To her colleagues, she was known for her sharpness, a word that could describe her professionalism as much as her occasionally cutting tone. Standing at the boarding gate, she glanced up from her tablet, her smile automatic and practiced. Then Dr. James Reid stepped forward. Tall, poised, and dressed impeccably, he looked like someone accustomed to moving through high spaces. His salt and pepper hair and dark skin gave him a distinctive air, and his calm demeanor contrasted with the bustling crowd around him. As he handed his boarding pass to Amy, her smile faltered for just a moment. She began, her tone more inquisitive than welcoming. "Are you sure this is your flight?" Dr. Reid blinked, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Yes, this is Flight 275 to Atlanta," he said evenly. Amy hesitated. "Are you? And first classes?" Her eyes dropped to his boarding pass and scanned it a little longer than necessary. "Yes," Dr. Reid replied, his voice steady but his expression growing cooler. With a small huff that she didn't seem to notice herself making, Amy finally gestured toward the jet bridge. "Right this way, sir." Once aboard, Dr. Reid settled into his first-class seat, placing his briefcase under the seat in front of him and pulling out his tablet. Amy hovered in the cabin, welcoming other passengers with smiles that felt warmer and more genuine. "Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Randall. Lovely to have you back with us," she chirped at an elderly white couple. "Can I get you something to drink before we take off?" When she reached Dr. Reid, her demeanor shifted. "Do you need anything?" she asked curtly, not quite meeting his eyes. "A glass of water, please," Dr. Reid replied politely. Her nod was perfunctory. "I'll get to you," she said before moving on. Dr. Reid raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, instead returning his attention to his tablet. Other passengers noticed the disparity. A young man across the aisle frowned, whispering to his companion, "What's with her attitude?" The flight was in the air for just under an hour when a faint commotion started in the economy section. A middle-aged man had slumped in his seat, his face pale and beads of sweat forming on his forehead. His wife's frantic voice cut through the cabin. "Somebody, help, he's not responding." Amy rushed to the back, her voice crisp over the intercom. "If there is a doctor on board, please make yourself known immediately." The cabin fell silent for a beat before Dr. Reid calmly rose from his seat in first class. All eyes followed him as he walked toward the back. Amy turned to see him approaching, her brows furrowing in surprise. She said, stepping in front of him as if to block his path, "Are you, doctor?" Dr. Reid's tone was clipped but professional. "Yes, I am." He brushed past her without another word, kneeling beside the unconscious passenger. In minutes, he had stabilized the man, instructing Amy and the other flight attendants on how to assist. His calm, commanding voice cut through the panic as he assessed the situation. "We'll need to administer oxygen," he said, glancing at Amy. "Can you get the mask from the kit?" She hesitated, flustered, before finally snapping into action. When the crisis was under control, Dr. Reid returned to his seat, greeted by quiet applause from passengers who had witnessed his expertise. Amy approached him, her expression a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. I didn't realize you were a doctor," she stammered. Dr. Reid looked up at her, his gaze steady and calm. "Didn't think I fit the profile?" he asked, his voice low but cutting. Amy flushed. "No, it's not that. I just—" Dr. Reid raised a hand, stopping her. "I've dealt with people like you before," he said quietly, his voice even. "I'm here to save lives, not fit into anyone's box." Amy swallowed hard and walked away, her cheeks burning. The flight landed in Atlanta without further incident, but the tension lingered. As passengers disembarked, several stopped to thank Dr. Reid personally, offering handshakes and words of appreciation. One young woman paused beside him and said softly, "Thank you for being so patient." She was out of line. Dr. Reid gave her a small, polite smile. "Thank you," he replied. By the time Amy stepped off the plane, the story had already started spreading. Several passengers had captured video clips of her earlier interactions with Dr. Reid, and they were being shared online with captions like #FirstClassBias and #FlightRacismExposed. The next morning, Dr. Reid performed the life-saving surgery that had called him to Atlanta in the first place, cementing his reputation as a world-class surgeon. Meanwhile, Amy found herself at the center of a media storm, her actions scrutinized and criticized by thousands of strangers. The airline issued an apology, promising an investigation into the incident, and Amy was placed on suspension. In interviews, Dr. Reid declined to dwell on the flight attendant's behavior. "What matters," he said, "is that people learn from moments like these. Bias and prejudice are everywhere. But so are opportunities to do better." Dr. James Reid sat in his hotel suite the next morning, sipping a cup of black coffee as the city skyline stretched before him. His phone buzzed incessantly on the desk, notifications piling up from news outlets, colleagues, and strangers alike. Overnight, the flight incident had gone viral. Videos of the interaction at the gate and in the cabin, along with passengers' accounts of Amy's behavior, had sparked outrage online. One tweet read, "Dr. James Reid saves a life mid-flight, but not before facing blatant discrimination. When will we learn? #FirstClassBias." Another, "Imagine questioning a man's worth because of his skin color, only to find out he's more qualified than anyone else on that plane. Do better." #FlightRacismExposed. Dr. Reid scrolled through the comments, his emotions a mix of frustration and weariness. He had faced moments like this his entire life, but the public exposure made it different this time. His assistant called. "Dr. Reid, good morning, are you all right? The media's been relentless." "I'm fine," he replied. "Let them talk. I'm not the one who needs to defend their actions." Meanwhile, Amy sat at her kitchen table, staring at her laptop in shock. Her name was plastered across countless headlines. "Flight attendant faces backlash for racism toward renowned surgeon." #FirstClassBias. A viral lesson in prejudice. Airline under fire after incident with black doctor. Her social media accounts were flooded with comments. Many angry, some supportive but misguided, and others outright hostile. "I didn't mean anything by it," she whispered to herself, pacing the room. "People are overreacting." Her phone rang. It was her manager at the airline. "Amy, we need to talk." The voice on the other end said, sharp and businesslike. "You're being placed on indefinite leave while we investigate the incident. The company will release a statement condemning discrimination, and will need you to stay off social media for the time being." "But I didn't." "It doesn't matter," the manager interrupted. "The damage is done. We'll be in touch." By the afternoon, news programs and talk shows were dissecting the incident. A popular morning show hosted a segment titled Unpacking Bias in Everyday Life. One guest, a civil rights advocate, commented, "This incident isn't just about one flight attendant's actions. It's a reflection of deeper systemic biases that people of color face every day, even when they've achieved the highest levels of success." Another panelist, a former airline employee, added, "This kind of behavior isn't uncommon in the airline industry. It's subtle but pervasive, judging passengers based on appearance, tone, or assumptions about their means. This story just happened to get caught on camera." Days later, Dr. Reid was invited to speak on a prominent interview show. The host, a well-known journalist, began, "Dr. Reid, your story has sparked a national conversation about prejudice. Can you tell us how you felt during the incident?" Dr. Reid leaned forward, his tone measured. "I wasn't surprised," he said. "Experiences like this are a reality for many people of color. What struck me was how automatic her assumptions were. She didn't think she was doing anything wrong. And that's the problem." "Do you think she should lose her job?" the host asked. Dr. Reid paused. "I don't believe in canceling people for mistakes," he said. "But accountability matters. What I'd like to see is education, training that addresses implicit bias, not just for her but for the entire industry." A week after the incident, Amy received an email from her employer offering her an option. She could either resign or attend a rigorous bias training program and speak with a company mentor about the impact of her actions. Initially, she resisted. "Why should I have to go through this? It was a misunderstanding," she argued to a friend. Her friend, a woman of color, wasn't sympathetic. "Amy, people like me live with this every day. Maybe you didn't mean harm, but intent doesn't erase impact. You have a chance to learn. Take it?" Reluctantly, Amy agreed. The training was eye-opening. She learned about microaggressions, systemic racism, and how unconscious biases shape interactions. For the first time, she began to see herself through the eyes of others. Months later, by coincidence or fate, Amy and Dr. Reid crossed paths again. They were both invited to a corporate diversity event. The airline had asked Amy to share her experience as part of their new training initiative, and Dr. Reid had been invited as a keynote speaker. When Amy approached Dr. Reid during a break, her face was flushed with embarrassment. "Dr. Reid," she began, "I don't know if you remember me, but—" "I remember," he said, his tone neutral. "I want to apologize," she said. "Not just for how I treated you, but for not understanding the harm I caused. I've learned a lot since then, and I'm trying to do better." Reid studied her for a moment before offering a small nod. "Growth is a process," he said. "What matters is what you do moving forward." The incident became a case study in corporate training programs and a reminder of the importance of confronting bias in all its forms. Amy continued working for the airline, but with a new perspective. Dr. Reid returned to his life-saving work, his reputation as both a skilled surgeon and a quiet force for change intact. The story didn't solve the larger issues of racism or prejudice, but it sparked conversations and, for some, planted seeds of awareness. As Dr. Reid said in his speeches afterward, "Change doesn't happen in an instant. It happens in moments, in conversations, and in the choices we make every day." This was just one of those moments. And so, what began as an ordinary flight turned into a powerful reminder of the biases that exist in our world, and how one man's grace under pressure not only saved a life but also started a conversation that needed to happen. If you found this story thought-provoking, there's so much more waiting for you on this channel. We share real and fictional stories that challenge societal norms, inspire empathy, and spark meaningful dialogue. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you're the first to know when we release our next video. Let's continue exploring stories that matter, one video at a time. See you in the next one.